The alien princess had always known that humans were nothing more than a primitive species. She had grown up hearing stories about their weakness, their petty squabbles, and their inability to rise above their own limited existence. Her people, the Zorathians, were proud and strong, with technology that left the humans far behind. They were everything that Earth was not. The princess had been taught from an early age that her species was the superior one in the galaxy. But as she gazed out of her palace window, looking down on the city that shimmered beneath the 3 moons, she couldn't help but feel that something was missing. Her name was Kaela, and as the daughter of the Zorathian emperor, she was destined for greatness. But greatness meant responsibility, and she could already feel the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. Today, she was to meet the human delegation that had arrived on their planet to negotiate an alliance. The idea of being in the same room as those weaklings made her stomach churn. She didn't understand why the Emperor had even considered this alliance. The humans were of no real value to their empire. But the Emperor had his reasons, and his reasons were always final. The meeting took place in the Grand Hall, a massive structure made of crystal and marble with towering pillars that stretched up to the sky. The human soldier who entered the room was everything Kaela had expected. Rough around the edges, his uniform unkempt, his face hardened by the hardships of a world far less advanced than hers. He was taller than most humans, but that only made him look more clumsy in her eyes. His eyes were a striking blue, almost out of place in this alien world, and his dark hair was cut short, adding to his rugged appearance. Kaela couldn't help but stare at him as he walked toward the royal dais where she sat, her gaze sharp and unblinking. "Well, well," Kaela said with a smirk, leaning back in her chair. "You certainly don't look like the kind of man who could broker peace. Are you sure you're the right person for the job?" The soldier, whose name was Commander Marcus, didn't flinch. He stood tall and met her gaze with a calm confidence. "I'm not here to look pretty, Princess. I'm here to get results." "Results?" Kaela laughed softly, the sound echoing through the hall. "I doubt the humans even know what results are. Your entire species is a footnote in the history of the galaxy. My people have ruled for centuries. What makes you think your kind could possibly offer anything of value?" Commander Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch between them. The tension in the air thickened, but Marcus was not one to back down from a challenge. "We might not have centuries of history, Princess, but we've survived. We've fought against impossible odds and come out on top. That's something your people might not understand, but it's the reason we're here." Kaela's eyes narrowed. The soldier's words were bold, but she could tell he didn't fully grasp the enormity of the situation. "Survival isn't enough. Commander, your people are a dying breed, clinging to a planet that is far behind the times. My people have the power to shape the future of the galaxy. What could a species like yours possibly bring to the table?" Marcus stepped forward, his eyes hardening. "Maybe not what you expect, but we have something your empire doesn't. Grit. The ability to fight when the odds are stacked against us. When your empire falls, and it will be humans who rise to take its place. And when that happens, you'll be glad we're on your side." Kaela scoffed. "Is that a threat, Commander?" "It's a promise," he replied, his voice calm but firm. For a moment, there was silence. Kaela didn't know what to make of this human. She had expected arrogance, yes, but this soldier seemed different. He wasn't intimidated by her position, her beauty, or her words. In fact, he seemed completely unfazed by her attempts to mock him. The princess felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt before. Respect. But she quickly pushed it aside, reminding herself that she was the superior one here. "Well, Commander, you've certainly given me something to think about," Kaela said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'll be sure to tell my father you think we're in danger of falling. I'm sure he'll appreciate your insight." Marcus didn't reply, and Kaela saw the hint of a smile on his lips. There was something about him that intrigued her, but she would never admit it. He was still a human, and her pride wouldn't allow her to show weakness in front of him. The meeting continued. The tension between them never fully eased. Kaela couldn't stop thinking about the soldier's words, and as much as she hated to admit it, a small part of her was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to humans than she had been led to believe. But she pushed those thoughts aside. She had a reputation to uphold, and the last thing she needed was for a human soldier to make her question everything she had ever been taught. The meeting ended without much fanfare, and as Marcus turned to leave, Kaela found herself watching him more intently than she intended. It wasn't respect she felt, it was something far more dangerous. Curiosity. But Kaela was determined to never let that curiosity show. After all, he was just a human, and she was the princess of the Zorathian Empire. Nothing could change that. Days passed, and the tension between Kaela and Commander Marcus only grew. The princess tried to put the human soldier out of her mind, but it wasn't easy. His words, his confidence, and his strange calmness in the face of her mockery kept lingering in her thoughts. She had never met anyone like him before. The Zorathians were proud and their warriors were skilled, but none had ever made her feel this. Unsettled. Meanwhile, Marcus was adjusting to life on the Zorathian planet. He had been assigned to work closely with the royal family, and though the environment was luxurious, it wasn't exactly welcoming. The alien palace was massive, with halls that seemed to stretch forever, and the people who lived in it looked at him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. They didn't see him as an ally. They saw him as a tool, someone to use in their own power struggle. The Zorathians were a proud race, their empire built on centuries of military dominance and technological superiority. But Marcus had been trained for this. He had faced worse situations in the past, and he wasn't about to let the princess's attitude stop him from achieving his mission. The next day he was summoned to the royal training ground. He had been told to meet Kaela there. As he walked through the marble corridors, he felt the weight of the alien architecture pressing down on him. It wasn't just the building that was oppressive, it was the people. The way they looked at him like he was an outsider, like he didn't belong. But he didn't care. He had a job to do, and that's all that mattered. When he entered the training room, Kaela was already there, standing tall in her royal uniform. She looked even more regal today, her golden hair tied back in a perfect braid, her eyes sharp and calculating. The moment she saw him, a smirk crossed her face. "So, Commander," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Ready to prove that humans can actually fight?" Marcus didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that showing emotion in the face of mockery only made things worse. "I'm here to show you that humans can do more than just survive. We adapt. We fight smart." Kaela raised an eyebrow, clearly not impressed. "Smart? Is that how you would describe your kind?" She gestured to the training ground. "Let's see if your smart can match our strength and speed." Without another word, she signaled to the trainers who began preparing the battle simulations. The room transformed into a combat arena, and Kaela took her position on one side while Marcus stood across from her. The lights dimmed, and a low hum filled the air as the simulation began. Kaela charged first, her movements graceful and fluid, as if she had been trained for this moment her entire life. Marcus barely had time to react before she was upon him, her speed almost too much to follow. But he didn't panic. He had trained for situations like this. Using his environment, he ducked under her first strike and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding her next attack. He was fast, but not as fast as her. His strength was nowhere near the same, but he knew how to use his agility to his advantage. Kaela's eyes widened in surprise. She had expected him to be weak, slow, and easy to defeat. But here he was, keeping up with her, dodging her strikes and countering when he could. "You're not as useless as I thought," she said, her voice betraying a hint of admiration. Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he focused on the battle. He knew that if he let his guard down, even for a second, he would lose. He darted in for a quick strike, catching Kaela off guard and landing a blow to her shoulder. For a moment, she stood still, stunned by the hit. But then her eyes flashed with anger. "You dare strike a princess?" Marcus didn't give her time to recover. He took advantage of her shock, launching a series of quick, calculated moves. He wasn't trying to hurt her, he was trying to prove something. He wanted her to understand that humans were capable of more than she gave them credit for. Kayla blocked his next strike and retaliated with a powerful move, knocking him back. But Marcus recovered quickly, rolling out of her reach. He wasn't going to give up. Not now. The battle continued for several more minutes, with both of them pushing their limits. Kayla was fast, but Marcus was resourceful. He used his knowledge of human combat techniques to his advantage, anticipating her moves and countering with precision. Finally, the simulation ended, and the arena returned to its original state. Both Kayla and Marcus were breathing heavily, covered in sweat. The trainers stepped forward to assess the results, but Kayla waved them off. "You didn't completely embarrass yourself," she said, her tone less condescending than before. "I'll give you that." Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow and stood tall. "I told you. We fight smart." Kayla looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps I underestimated you," she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she turned and walked away. "We'll see how much more you can do, Commander." As Marcus stood there, catching his breath, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of accomplishment. He had managed to impress Kayla, but that wasn't the only thing that mattered. He had earned her respect, just a little bit. And in this world of aliens and strange power plays, respect was something that was hard to come by. But he wasn't done yet. The battle for her respect had only just begun, and the truth about who she really was, what she was capable of, was still a mystery to him. The next few days were filled with intense work. Despite their earlier sparring, both Kayla and Marcus were forced to put aside their differences. A new crisis had arisen. An alien faction from a distant planet had begun to threaten Zorathian borders. If left unchecked, they could destabilize the entire region, including Earth's alliance with the Zorathians. The Emperor, Kaela's father, was in full control of the military strategy. But he recognized that this conflict was beyond his own empire's immediate capabilities. That's why he turned to the human delegation for help. It was a decision Kaela still struggled with, but she knew it was necessary. As much as she despised the idea of relying on humans, the threat was too great for pride to get in the way. Kayla found herself once again standing beside Commander Marcus in the war room, surrounded by alien strategists and military officials. The map of their galaxy stretched out across the massive holographic screen, with red and blue markers indicating the locations of the enemy forces. The air was thick with tension, and Kayla could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest. "We'll need to act fast," the general said, his voice deep and full of authority. "If the enemy moves any closer, we risk losing control of the outer colonies. We need to launch a counteroffensive, and we need it now." Kayla's eyes scanned the holographic map. She had been raised to handle these situations, decisions made in moments of pressure, the weight of entire civilizations on her shoulders. But this time she wasn't alone. Marcus stood beside her, his face set in determination, his mind working at full speed. "Human tactics can be effective if used right," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "But we'll need to think outside the box. This isn't just about brute strength. It's about strategy." Kayla looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus moved toward the map, pointing at the enemy's weak spots. "Their forces are spread out too thin. If we hit them from multiple angles, we can catch them off guard. It's risky, but it could work. Kayla frowned. That's a bold plan, but if we fail, we risk everything. Failure's not an option, Marcus replied, his gaze unwavering. But it's not about strength. It's about timing and precision. We'll need to strike fast, before they even know what hit them. The alien generals exchanged uncertain looks, but Kayla could see the flicker of respect in their eyes. Marcus had given them something they hadn't expected, a plan that didn't rely on brute force but on clever tactics. Even Kayla, who had grown up with the idea that Zorathian's strength was all that mattered, found herself considering the possibilities. "We'll move forward with your plan, Commander," Kayla said, her voice steady. "But know this, if we fail, it won't just be the humans who pay the price. The Zorathians will fall too." Marcus gave a slight nod, understanding the gravity of her words. "Understood, Princess." As the meeting came to an end, Kayla felt the strange weight of responsibility shift slightly. She had always been the one giving orders, the one leading her people. But this time, she had to trust someone else. Someone who had once been nothing more than a mockery to her. Later that night, Kayla couldn't sleep. The war room still echoed in her mind, the flickering images of the enemy forces haunting her thoughts. She had been raised to be a ruler, but being a ruler meant more than just giving orders. It meant carrying the weight of an entire empire on your shoulders. And right now, that weight was heavier than ever. She stood by the window of her quarters, staring out at the vast city below. The lights of the Zorathian capital shimmered, casting long shadows across the streets. But even in the beauty of her world, Kayla felt a sense of emptiness. She had been born into power, trained to lead, but she had never truly been tested. Now, with the fate of her people hanging in the balance, she wasn't sure if she was ready. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She turned, her heart skipping a beat. It was Marcus. "I thought you might be up," he said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. His expression was serious, but there was something else in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Kayla didn't respond right away, but instead turned back to the window. "I couldn't sleep. There's too much on my mind." Marcus walked up beside her, standing in silence for a moment as he gazed out at the city. "I understand. You're under a lot of pressure." Kayla glanced at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. "Pressure is nothing new to me, but this feels different. The future of my people, my family, it's all at stake." Marcus nodded. "I know what that's like. Back on Earth, we fight because we have no choice. Every day is a struggle for survival. But I've seen how your people fight. They have strength, yes, but they also have something more, pride. And that pride can turn into something powerful, when it's channeled the right way." Kayla didn't respond at first. She didn't want to admit it, but Marcus was right. There was something about the Zorathian spirit that made them different. They didn't just fight for power, they fought for pride, for honor. And maybe that was what had made them so powerful for so long. "I'm not sure if I can live up to the legacy of my father," Kayla said quietly. "He was a great emperor, a great leader. But now I have to make decisions that could either save or destroy everything." Marcus looked at her, his expression softening. "You're not your father, Kayla. You're your own person, and I think you'll do just fine." His words weren't what she had expected, but something in them made her feel a little lighter, a little more hopeful. For the first time in a long while, Kayla felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in this fight. The day of the battle arrived faster than Kayla had expected. The tension that had been building over the past few weeks was now a constant pressure in the air. The Zorathian forces, alongside their human allies, had prepared for the worst. But despite the thorough planning, Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She stood in the command center, looking at the holographic map of the enemy positions. The markers on the screen were moving slowly, like a countdown to disaster. Time was running out, and they needed to act fast if they were to prevent the enemy from crossing the Zorathian borders. But there was more on Kayla's mind than the battle itself. She had been raised to be a leader, to make decisions that shaped the fate of entire worlds. But this mission was different. For the first time in her life, she was not in full control. She had to rely on others, especially Marcus. Her pride made it hard to admit, but the human soldier had proven himself more capable than she had ever expected. His quick thinking and tactical skills had earned him a level of respect she hadn't thought possible. But as the pressure mounted, Kayla couldn't help but feel uncertain. The doors to the command center opened and Marcus entered, his expression serious. The moment their eyes met, a quiet understanding passed between them. No words were needed. They both knew what was at stake. "Are we ready?" Kayla asked, her voice steady, though inside she felt a storm brewing. Marcus nodded, his face calm but tense. "As ready as we can be. The enemy's forces are moving into position. If we don't act now, we'll be fighting on multiple fronts." Kayla took a deep breath. She had faced countless battles in her life, but this one was different. This was her first time commanding a fight that involved more than just her people. It involved humans, too. And that made it personal. "Let's do it," she said, her voice firm, pushing aside her doubts. She was a leader. This was her moment to prove that she could live up to the legacy of her father, even if that legacy was now full of questions. The battle unfolded with ruthless efficiency. The Zorathian fleet moved out to meet the enemy head-on, while the human forces, led by Marcus, launched a surprise attack from the flanks. The holographic map was a blur of red and blue as the battle raged on, each move calculated, each strike carefully planned. Marcus had been right about one thing. The enemy was spread too thin, and with their forces scattered across multiple positions, they couldn't defend against the combined assault. But even with their tactics working, Kayla found herself still unsure. She kept glancing at the screen, watching the positions shift, her mind racing with thoughts of what could go wrong. Every time a new alert flashed across the map, her heart skipped a beat. Every mistake would cost them more than just territory. It would cost lives. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden explosion that rocked the command center. The lights flickered as the sound of distant blasts filled the air. The enemy had launched a counteroffensive. "Status?" Kayla demanded, her voice sharp. The lead strategist turned to her, his face pale. "The enemy is targeting our fleet's weak spots. They've anticipated our move." Kayla cursed under her breath. She had known the risk. Nothing was certain. In war, but hearing the confirmation still stung. They needed a change of tactics, fast. She turned to Marcus, who was standing at the edge of the command center, his gaze locked on the battlefield. "We need to reinforce the eastern flank," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "They're not expecting a strong push there. If we hit them now, we can break their lines." Kayla hesitated, but only for a moment. She knew Marcus was right. This was their chance to turn the tide. "Do it," she commanded. Marcus moved quickly, barking orders to his men as they prepared for the new attack. Kayla watched as he took charge, his focus unwavering. For a brief moment, she felt a strange sense of admiration for him, something she had never expected. The human soldier who had once seemed so beneath her was now leading their forces, with the precision of someone who had been doing it his whole life. The attack came swiftly. The human forces pushed through the enemy's defenses, catching them off guard. Kayla watched the markers on the map shift as the eastern flank began to break, the enemy forces scrambling to adjust. The Zorathian fleet took advantage of the gap, launching a coordinated strike that crippled the enemy's communications. It was working. For the first time in days, Kayla felt a sense of relief. But the battle wasn't over yet. The enemy was resilient, and they would not give up without a fight. As the battle raged on, Kaela found herself fighting alongside her people and the humans. She led a squadron of Zorathian soldiers, her sharp eyes scanning the battlefield for weaknesses. The battle was brutal, but it was clear that the human tactics were making a difference. Marcus had been right all along. Their success was not in strength alone. It was in their ability to adapt, to think differently, to use every advantage. Hours later, when the dust finally settled, the enemy had been pushed back. The battlefield was littered with debris, but the Zorathian and human forces had emerged victorious. It had been a close call, but they had done it. Kayla stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching as the last of the enemy forces retreated. She felt exhausted, but there was a strange sense of pride swelling within her. They had won, not just because of Zorathian strength, but because they had worked together. Humans and Zorathians side by side. Marcus approached her, his face bloodied, but his eyes still full of determination. "We did it," he said quietly. Kayla nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Yes, we did. For a moment, they stood in silence, both knowing that this battle had changed something between them. They had been forced to rely on each other, and in doing so, they had discovered something powerful. The alliance between their people had just begun, but it had already proven itself stronger than either had expected. As Kaela looked out over the battlefield, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The war was far from over, but for the first time in her life, she felt confident that she wasn't facing it alone. The days following the victory were filled with celebrations, but the weight of the battle still hung in the air. Kayla walked through the corridors of the palace, her mind racing. The victory had been hard-earned, but it had also brought something unexpected: respect. From the Zorathian soldiers to the human commanders, Kaela had seen firsthand how much her leadership mattered. She had commanded the Zorathian fleet with precision, but it was Marcus's human tactics that had turned the tide. The princess wasn't used to sharing the spotlight. She had always been the one to lead, the one to make the final decision. But today, for the first time, she found herself standing beside Marcus, not as a human soldier she mocked, but as an equal. She couldn't deny it any longer. She had underestimated him. And in doing so, she had underestimated what humans could bring to the table. Kayla paused at the balcony that overlooked the city. The Zorathian capital shimmered under the twin moons, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax, to forget about the politics and the war. But the peace was fleeting. Her thoughts quickly returned to Marcus. Over the past few weeks, they had worked together closely, training, strategizing, fighting side by side. She had started to see him not just as a soldier, but as something more, a partner perhaps. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was, Marcus. He was dressed in his military uniform, the dirt and blood of battle still on him, but there was something in his eyes that made him look different. He wasn't the same human soldier who had first walked into the palace, rough around the edges and full of arrogance. He had proven himself, and in doing so, he had earned Kayla's respect. "You've been quiet," Marcus said, his voice low. "Is everything all right?" Kayla hesitated, her gaze fixed on the city below. She had never been one to open up, especially not to someone like him, but today she felt a strange pull, a desire to speak her mind. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "about everything that's happened. The battle, the alliance, and us." Marcus took a step closer, his eyes watching her closely. "What about us?" Kayla turned to face him, her expression serious. "I never imagined this. I never imagined that I would need humans, not like this. But you proved me wrong. You were right. your tactics, your ability to think differently helped us win. And I'm not used to being wrong." Marcus's lips curved into a small smile. "It's not about being right or wrong. It's about doing what's needed, about finding a way when everything seems impossible." Kayla nodded slowly, her eyes searching his face for something she couldn't quite explain. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he understood her, that made her feel like maybe they weren't so different after all. Despite their different worlds, their different upbringings, they had both been raised to lead, to fight, to survive. And in that way, they were more alike than she had ever cared to admit. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Kayla spoke again, her voice softer this time. "What happens next? The war isn't over. We've won a battle, but there's still more to come. And I don't know if we're ready." Marcus looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "No one's ever truly ready for war, but we do what we can, when we can. We face the next fight together, just like we did this one." Kayla met his eyes, and for the first time she felt a deep sense of trust. It wasn't just about the battle anymore. It was about something more, something that had been building between them since the moment they first met. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew it was something important. "We can win this war," Kayla said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But we'll need to stay united, humans and Zorathians alike, and we'll need to trust each other more than ever before." Marcus nodded. "Agreed. No matter what happens, we'll fight together." As the words hung in the air, Kayla felt a sense of peace settle within her. She had never imagined that a human soldier would become someone she relied on. She had never imagined that she would feel this way about anyone, let alone someone from another world. But the war had changed them both. It had brought them together, made them allies when they had once been enemies. The next morning, the entire palace seemed to hum with energy. The celebrations had continued through the night, but now the work began again. The war was far from over, and there were still many battles to fight. But Kayla felt different. She no longer felt the pressure of having to face everything alone. She had Marcus by her side, and together they would face whatever challenges came their way. In the days that followed, Kayla and Marcus continued to work closely, refining their plans and strengthening the bond between their people. They spent long hours together in the war room, planning each move carefully. Their respect for each other grew with each passing day. What had once been a forced alliance had turned into something more, a partnership that neither of them had expected, but both of them had come to rely on. Kayla looked at Marcus one evening as they stood together, watching the sun set over the capital. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said, her voice filled with quiet wonder. Marcus turned to her, his expression soft. "We have, and we'll keep going, together." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. For the first time in a long while, Kayla felt hopeful. The war was far from over, but she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She had someone beside her, someone she could trust, someone she could count on. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. The days following their quiet conversation were filled with a new sense of determination. The victory over the enemy had proven that the Zorathians and humans could work together, but it had also made one thing clear. The war was far from over. New threats had already begun to emerge from the shadows, and it seemed like peace was always just out of reach. Kayla stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the capital city once more. The vast city below seemed peaceful, but she knew better. The calm was just an illusion. In the distance, she could see the ships of their fleet, preparing for the next phase of their campaign. The war was far from finished. It was an exhausting, never-ending cycle of conflict, and Kaela found herself wondering how much longer she could keep up. Behind her, she heard the door open. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Marcus's footsteps were steady and firm, a sound she had come to associate with reliability. Over the past few weeks, he had become more than just an ally. He had become someone she could trust, someone she could count on in the face of impossible odds. "You look lost in thought," Marcus said, his voice breaking the silence. Kayla turned to face him, offering a small smile. "I'm thinking about the future, about how much longer this war will go on, and about how much of it I can really control." Marcus stepped closer, his gaze understanding. "None of us can control everything, but we can control what we do next. We make the best choices we can, with the information we have." She nodded, though her mind was still heavy with doubt. "I've been in command of my people for so long, but this war is different. I've never had to rely on others so much before. It's strange, and it's hard for me." "I understand," Marcus said softly. "I've had to learn that too. Back on Earth, it was always about fighting for survival. But here, it's about something more. It's about working together, about unity. And that's what makes us strong." Kaela looked at him, searching his face for any sign of uncertainty. But there was none. Marcus was calm, confident, and he spoke with the quiet strength that had impressed her from the very beginning. Despite all the differences between their worlds, they shared a common purpose: survival. And that was something she could relate to. "You're right," she said after a long pause. "Unity is our strength. But I wonder sometimes if it's enough. The enemy keeps coming, and we're always one step behind. What if it's never enough?" Marcus's expression softened, and he stepped closer to her, placing a hand on the railing next to hers. "We've been through worse, but we keep fighting, because that's what we do. We never stop." Kaela met his gaze, feeling a flicker of something inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She felt vulnerable, but it wasn't a weakness. It was a strength, the strength to trust someone else, to lean on them when the burden became too heavy. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you've done, for believing in us, for believing in me." Marcus smiled, his eyes softening. "You don't need to thank me. We're in this together. Always have been." The words settled between them, and for a moment, Kaela let herself relax. The weight of the war, the burden of leadership, all of it seemed a little lighter with Marcus by her side. She had never thought she could trust a human, let alone feel something beyond respect for one, but Marcus had proven time and time again that there was more to him than just his military skills. He had a heart, a loyalty to something greater than himself. And that was what made him a true leader. "We should prepare," Kaela said, breaking the moment. "There's still much to be done." Marcus nodded. "We'll be ready." They walked together toward the war room side by side. The atmosphere in the palace had shifted over the past few weeks. The alien and human forces were no longer separate entities. They were a single, united front. The soldiers, both human and Zorathian, had begun to work together as equals, and it was showing in their results. The bond between their people had grown stronger, and Kaela could feel the difference in the way the war room functioned. There was a new energy, a new sense of purpose. As they entered the war room, the strategists were already at work, analyzing the latest reports. The enemy had regrouped, and it was clear that they were planning something big. But Kaela felt more confident now. The tension in her chest, the doubt that had been holding her back, was slowly lifting. She had always known how to command, but now she also knew how to trust. And that made all the difference. "Here's the new intel," the lead strategist said, pointing to a large holographic map of the enemy's movements. They've been gathering forces in the outer rim. If we don't act fast, they'll have us surrounded. Kayla studied the map, her mind racing. She could see the enemy's pattern, their weaknesses. We'll attack from the flank, she said, decisively. We'll catch them off guard and hit them hard. No more waiting. We strike now. The room fell silent as the others processed her words. Then Marcus spoke up, his voice calm but firm. I agree. It's our best chance. We move quickly and decisively. Kayla looked at him, a sense of gratitude rising within her. She had made the decision, but it was Marcus's unwavering belief in the plan that gave her the confidence to carry it out. Together, they had created something stronger than either could have done alone. Prepare the troops, she said. We move out at dawn. As the room came alive with activity, Kayla felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in a long time. The war was far from over, but with Marcus by her side and the united strength of both their peoples, she knew they had a fighting chance. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Together. The dawn came swiftly, bringing with it the promise of a new chapter. Kayla stood at the front of the command center, her hands resting on the console, her gaze fixed on the map ahead. The tension from the previous days had settled into a quiet determination. The battle for survival wasn't over, but today, she felt ready. She had come a long way from the princess who mocked the human soldier, and the journey had changed her in ways she hadn't expected. Beside her, Marcus stood with a calm demeanor, his presence steady and reassuring. He had been her constant through every challenge they had faced, and now, more than ever, Kayla realized how much she had come to rely on him not just as an ally but as a friend. She had never expected to find someone like him in the midst of war, someone who understood what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself. Everything is set, Marcus said quietly, his voice breaking her thoughts. The troops are in position, and the ships are ready to launch. Kayla nodded, though she could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders. This was the moment when everything would either fall into place or shatter. The plan they had come up with was bold, attacking the enemy from multiple angles, using the element of surprise to strike at the heart of their forces. It was risky, but it was the best chance they had. We go in full force, Kayla said, her voice firm. We don't hold back. This is the final push. Marcus met her eyes, his expression unreadable. We're ready, and no matter what happens, we fight together. For a moment, Kayla just looked at him. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. There was just the quiet certainty that they could win, that they would win. It was something she hadn't felt in a long time, not since before the war began. It was the strength of their unity, the bond that had grown between them, and it made her feel invincible. Then let's finish this, she said, turning back to the map. Send the signal. As the orders were passed through the command center, the air was filled with the hum of activity. Soldiers moved quickly and efficiently, preparing for the final assault. Kayla couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the way everyone was working together. Zorathians and humans, side by side, fighting for a future they all believed in. It was a far cry from the tension and distrust that had marked their first meetings. Marcus gave her a final nod before walking out of the room, heading toward the front lines. Kayla watched him go, feeling a pang of something unfamiliar. A mix of admiration and something deeper. Something that had been growing between them for a while now. But there was no time for those thoughts. There was a war to win. The battle began with the crackle of communication in her earpiece. The troops moved forward, launching the first wave of attacks on the enemy's positions. The ships took off, their engines roaring as they broke through the atmosphere. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest as the markers on the map shifted, showing the progress of the assault. For hours, the battle raged on. The skies above the planet were filled with the flashing lights of gunfire, and the ground shook with the force of explosions. Kaela's mind stayed sharp, calculating each move, each decision. There was no room for error, but as she watched the battle unfold on the screen, she couldn't help but think back to how far they had come. The humans, once viewed as weak and inferior, were now an integral part of this fight. And she, once so certain of Zorathian superiority, had come to understand the strength in their unity. "Kaela," Marcus's voice came through her earpiece, breaking her thoughts. "We've hit their main base, but we're taking heavy fire. We need support on the west flank now." Kaela didn't hesitate. "On it. Hold tight, Commander." She turned to the tactical team, issuing orders with precision. Within moments, a team of Zorathian forces was mobilized, heading toward the western sector. The battle was far from over, but Kaela knew they could win. They had to. For all the lives that had been lost, for all the sacrifices that had been made, they couldn't afford to lose now. The hours seemed to stretch on as the battle unfolded. The sky was a storm of gunfire and explosions, the ground littered with debris. But through it all, Kaela and Marcus's plan was working. The enemy was disoriented, struggling to keep up with the quick and calculated movements of the combined forces. And with each passing minute, the tide of the battle shifted more in their favor. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last of the enemy forces were in retreat. Kaela stood in the command center, her hands clenched into fists as the final report came through. It was over. The war had been won. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tinged with exhaustion. Kaela knew this victory had come at a great cost. Many had fallen, both human and Zorathian. But they had achieved what seemed impossible: unity, strength, and victory. As the noise of celebration began to fill the palace, Kaela found herself standing alone in the war room. She had been through so much, and yet, in this moment, she realized that the greatest victory was not just the defeat of the enemy. It was the bond she had forged with the humans, and with Marcus in particular. They had fought together, and in doing so, they had changed the course of history. The doors opened, and Marcus stepped inside, his face tired but triumphant. He walked up to her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Kaela knew everything had changed. She wasn't just the princess of the Zorathian Empire anymore. She was something more, something stronger. And Marcus, the human soldier who had once been nothing more than a mockery, had become her equal, her ally, and in a way her companion. "We did it," Marcus said quietly. Kaela smiled, the weight of the moment sinking in. "We did." And for the first time in a long time, Kaela felt like the future was something she could face, confidently, and with the knowledge that she wasn't facing it alone.